Right, we're continuing to try and find out who was the best All-Ireland winner of the last 16 years. We're on the sixth fixture at this stage. I'll just throw it up on screen for anyone who's unfamiliar with the idea of what's going on at the moment. We're looking all the way back from 2004 up until 2019, the 16 All-Ireland winners, and we're kind of pitting them together and drawing them in a knockout competition, and the public votes to decide who goes through. This week, it's Tipperary 2010. Who could forget gloriously stopping the drive for five against the Kilkenny team that, having previously lost the title a year earlier, which Clare picked up, came back and beat Tipperary after a replay. That was Eamon O'Shea's team against Brian Cody's. So just to throw it out there, just in general at first, Michael Verney, which way are you leaning here? It has to be Tip.
You're all talking about the drive for five. If you'd had the stomach to finish them off in 2009, there would have been no drive for five.
So you're going in that heavy straight away. The stomach. You mean when an unfair penalty was given in 2009 and then a small little tap from Benny Dunn and a little red card for that?
You're still harping back to refereeing decisions. By Jesus, it's unreal, isn't it?
Well, you're an awful man, but a Kilkenny supporter, and then people are still talking about the red card for Richie Hogan being harsh. Will you go away with that?
Yeah, that was what happened last August. This is 10 years ago, and you're still talking about a penalty. 11 years ago, you're talking about a penalty. Stop, will you?
Right. Okay. So to me, this seems a pretty cut and shut one. Tipperary 2010, a far superior team to Kilkenny 2014.
Shut and dry. Right. Okay. Number one, Kilkenny 2014 didn't lose a match. Tipperary 2010 hammered in the first round by a Cork side that went on to do absolutely nothing. Talk to me.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, they're fair points, but it's a bit like how, like Clare in 2013 beaten in their first game, but they still come back and have a roar and win in the All-Ireland final. Just because one day it doesn't go right, that doesn't mean you don't do amazing stuff for the rest of the year. Yeah, that Tipperary team, that was a real kind of misstep that day against Cork, no doubt about it. But to talk about why the Tip 2010 team is better than the Kilkenny team in 2014 that needed a replay to beat Tipperary, you simply have to look at the Kilkenny team. Which was a better team? The Kilkenny team that was going for a drive for five in 2010, albeit with a couple of injury issues, like John Tennyson did his cruciate, completed the final. Henry Shefflin did his cruciate, went off after 13 minutes.
There we are, straight away. The best player of all time wasn't on the field when Tipperary won the All-Ireland. They couldn't beat them in 2009 when he was on the field. And there you go. They needed him to be off the field to get over the line. They needed that little edge. They needed something like that to happen. The best player of all time wasn't on the field. I don't even think, look, comparing the teams is irrelevant. If the best player that I've ever seen and that you've ever seen, even though you'd probably say you don't want to say it, wasn't on the pitch, then I just don't buy that argument.
So you're saying that the substitutes that came in, and Michael Rice, for example, and the fact that you still had, like, I'll just bring up the teams on the screen here. I'll cycle it over now in a second. But this team in 2010 that Kilkenny had, a forward line, TJ Reid, Shefflin obviously went off injured early, Owen Larkin, Eddie Brennan, Richie Power, Taggy Fogarty, Michael Rice comes on, Derek Lyng comes on, Martin Fogarty, future hurler of the year Richie Hogan, John Mulhall comes on. It's not like you're bringing on a bunch of bums for Henry Shefflin. Obviously, brilliant player, 3-time hurler of the year he would end up as. But like, should your whole team fall apart to the point of getting hammered down the stretch simply because one player is not on the field?
I think it's more than one player not been on the field. It's the fact that of who the player was. Would Tipperary have won in 2010 if Lar or Owen Kelly weren't on the field? No, I don't think they would have had.
Seamus Callan didn't start the game. Like, his form had been up and down, and he goes on to be 4 times nominated for Hurler of the Year, and yet still they win it without him.
Right, okay, well that was 10 years ago. Like, he got nominated for Hurler of the Year in a couple of years later. Like, I don't think that's relevant. He wasn't in the form to be starting the 2010 final. So he wasn't starting the 2010 final for a reason. But I'm just saying that when Shefflin was on the field in 09, you weren't able to beat him. When he was off the field, and it was the psychological blow of, if he hadn't started, it actually would have been better for Kilkenny. It was the fact that he did start and ended up limping off, and it's kind of like, I don't know. Kilkenny weren't at their peak in 10 anyway, in my opinion. They weren't playing as well in 10 as they were in 8 or 9. And they were kind of, I don't know if it was the pressure of the 5 in a row, and which they talked about after the whole circus surrounding that as well. And then to be losing their best player 10 or 15 minutes into an All-Ireland final. They could cope with that in 07 against Limerick when he limped off, but they couldn't cope with that in 10. I think, not that they were on their last legs, but it's just so hard to keep it going, to keep that unbeaten run the whole way through. And then it was the loss of, to me, the best player of all time. That was the kind of tipping point.
You're talking absolute nonsense. The reason that they were able to get past Kilkenny or Limerick in 2007 is because the challenge from Limerick was paltry. I mean, they could have played with 13 men in that game and they probably still would have won because there was such a chasm. Like, it's not like this Kilkenny team was in any way, shape or form in 2010 close to the end or anything like that, or were transitioning. Kilkenny won 4 of the next 5 All-Ireland titles. So they're still in the thick of, like, right in the midst of their height. And then, like, quite simply put it this way. Which team was better, Kilkenny 2010 or Kilkenny 2014? If you were to put those two teams together, who would win? The answer is obviously Kilkenny 2010, and the fact that Tip 2010 beat them means that Tip clearly win this.
Well, let's talk about Kilkenny 2014 because we're talking too much about Tipperary 2010. The first game that was ever televised on Sky Sports, Kilkenny hammered Offaly in that first game. They beat Galway after 2 epics in Tullamore, hammered Dublin in the Leinster final, beat Limerick in the rain in a classic game, and then beat Tipperary, the greatest game of all time, as some people would say, the drawn game, and then went on to beat them in the replay. That is a fair resume, especially considering that in 2013, when Clare burst on the scene, Kilkenny were written off in some circles. It looked like many people thought Clare and Cork and the likes were going to dominate and that a new era was born. And as they always do, Kilkenny came back with a bang. Despite the fact that Tommy Walsh didn't play much in 14, was dropped, that was a big kind of shift. There were obviously there were 3 major changes before the replay in 14. But even that, there was new players blooded into the team. So they were kind of, the team was evolving at that time. And I just think I go back through that resume of teams that they beat. And especially, if people are saying the greatest game of all time, they won the greatest game of all, or well, they drew the greatest game of all time and then won the replay. Like, that is a fair Kilkenny outfit as well when you go down through it. I'm sure you're going to go down through the Kilkenny starting 15, particularly for the replay.
I will, but like the point is that both teams weren't at the level that they had been at in 2010. That Tipperary team, like Liam Sheedy left after that game, and it wasn't until 2014 that Tipperary recovered from that. And I know that they won Munster the next 2 years in 2011 and 2012. But it took a couple of years to recover from that 18-point defeat under Declan Ryan in 2012. 2013 was a bit of a write-off, and it was only midway through 2014 that they got to that level after losing to Limerick. So much like the Tip 2010 team, this team also started with a loss that year. Both finals, actually, both 2010 and 2014, were a huge kind of subplot was, will Henry Shefflin play? Or in 2014, more to the point, how much will he play? And I remember being down at Langton's for the pre-All-Ireland final press conference and asking Cody, is Henry Shefflin, who had done his, I think, ankle earlier in the year, and he came back in, and Cathal Barrett had...
he did he had a stress fracture in his foot, I think, didn't he?
That's it. Cathal Barrett had kind of... really won their battle in the league final, and that was the day that do you remember the whole penalty situation changed during that season with Anthony Nash and Stephen O'Keefe, but TJ Reid had scored 2 penalties by bringing him into about inside the 14, and then Tip had 3 penalties and got just a point in the All-Ireland final when you could no longer step inside the 21, so that worked out nicely for Kilkenny. But anyway, the point with Shefflin was there was a big conversation. I asked Cody just beforehand, is he good to go for a half an hour? Is he good to go for 70 minutes? And he said he's good to go for 74 or 75 minutes. But so you've got a Henry Shefflin that came on for a couple of minutes the first day in 14 and maybe 10 minutes the second day. So they still got through without him that day as well. So if they could get through that Tipperary team, I just kind of reckon that team wasn't as good as 10. Neither side was as good as 10. They didn't have Tommy Walsh in 2014. They had good young players, but I just think both sides weren't as good in 2014, so it had to be Tip 2010.
It's funny talking about Shefflin's injuries and all that. He actually did the stress fracture in the league final on Barrett the day Barrett gave him a hard time and was kind of missing. He's missing a couple of months after. But that was the first time. 14 was the first time where he wasn't able to bounce back from an injury. Like, his record of bouncing back from injuries is absolutely insane.
Well, maybe 2013 he possibly didn't either, because he got back a bit late. Remember that time he didn't he come on against Waterford in that game in Thurles, and then he started against Cork and got sent off.
He came on against Tiptown in Nolan Park. Remember, they warmed him up and the place went absolutely wild. 13 and 14, but the previous years he'd done cruciates, he'd done shoulders, he did the cruciate twice, and he was still able to. Was 13 the first time he missed a championship game? I think it was in the sequence, because he'd always gotten back. He'd always been able to get back in the off season. But Owen Larkin, in his book, I'm just reading at the moment, was saying that, like, towards those latter years, they were the first time where he lost anything coming back from injury. Invariably, he was able to come back better than ever from injury. But 13 and 14, and just seeing as we're talking about 14, like, it's a funny one. It was weird seeing him come on even in 14, and it felt, I don't know, he definitely retired at the right time, because if he'd hung on much longer, I'd say he would have been probably a permanent fixture on the bench, and it would have went out the kind of wrong way. But he went out the definitely the right way. That was obviously his 10th All-Ireland win. It's funny when you go down through some of the Kilkenny names that even played, like Lester Ryan was captain, kind of dropped himself off the Kilkenny panel not that long after, a couple of years after. John Power left the Kilkenny panel as well. They were able to win it kind of with new faces in there. Joey Holan started the first game, wing back. Kieran Joyce was parachuted in centre back for the replay. Again, they were able to do it, and they did it very impressively, when you go through the resume of the teams that they beat.
Just again to look over that Kilkenny 2014 team. So Owen Murphy in goals, I think I would see him as an upgrade. Paul Murphy had, I think this was kind of maybe his 4th year in a row with an All-Star or something like that. JJ Delaney, Jackie Tyrrell, Pádraig Walsh in, and obviously Tommy Walsh no longer in the starting team. Kieran Joyce, now he came in and got man of the match, and that was kind of a run of 2012, you had Wally Walsh starting the replay, having not started the first day, getting man of the match. Then 2013, Shane O'Donnell. 2014, a guy who was previously a sub, Kieran Joyce. And then 2015 or 16 in the football, Michael Fitzsimons came on in the replay, having not started the drawn game, and got man of the match. But anyway, it's a quirky little thing. So Pádraig Walsh, Kieran Joyce, Killian Buckley, Richie Hogan, Conor Fogarty, Michael Fennelly and Colin Fennelly, Owen Larkin, Richie Power, TJ Reid and John Power. To look at that team from 2010 for Tipperary: Brendan Cummins, Paddy Stapleton, Paul Curran, Michael Cahill, Declan Fanning, Conor O'Mahony, Pádraig Maher, Brendan Maher, Shane McGrath, Gearóid Ryan, Bonner Maher, John O'Brien, Noel McGrath, Owen Kelly and Lara Corbett. So the question is, I just still can't see. I know you're trying to twist it and wind me up and the whole lot. I still just don't see how you can make a case that 14 team, which was very much close to the end and doesn't have as many legendary names, how that can be stack up against the 2010 offerings.
You're upset, aren't you? You're upset that I would take a pop at what you view as the best Tipperary team in recent memory.
Well, do you know, I mean, you can't get away from the fact that this was a team going for 5 in a row, was seen as invincible, were 4-11 coming into that game against Tipperary. Like, there was no 4-11s going into 2014. Like, it was such an unbackable Kilkenny team at the time. And you can give me all the distractions that people talked about afterwards when they're trying to rationalise why their beloved Kilkenny didn't win 5 in a row. But the fact is, Tipperary were massive outsiders, partly because of the likes of that loss to Cork. I mean, they'd come through the back door against Offaly, didn't play particularly good. You were probably there that day. Against Wexford, didn't ultimately impress that much. Very good against Waterford. And then absolutely, for a finish, had a rip-roaring finish against Kilkenny. And I don't think either team in 14, I think that was just, it was an unbelievable game in 14, that drawn game especially. But it was kind of just, I don't know, I just don't think either team got to the height in that 2014 replay. Kilkenny won the arm wrestle, but it wasn't glorious hurling.
Just back to a game that I don't know if you mentioned it there, but Tip kind of struggled past Galway, as they invariably have, or Galway have struggled past Tipperary in that 2010 quarter final. It was kind of a mad one because I remember Éanna Ryan skinning Paddy Maher for a goal, and it was Lara that came up with that great score to win the game, and that kind of. That was the sort of game they needed to turn their season around a bit. They needed just that kind of big win just to push them on. They kind of always had Waterford at arm's length. And I know I made the argument about them losing the game against Cork, but the sole objective for Tipperary in 2010 was Kilkenny. No other team. There was no other team on their radar. They'd obviously... I kind of said in previous kind of shows that they were actually better off not meeting them in 08 because it probably would have been a fairly rude education for them. They met them in 09, could have beaten them, but they were primed to beat them in 10. And it just, if you compare 09 finals and the 10 final, like Tip made an absolute hero out of PJ Ryan in 09. In 2010, like they were clinical. Like Lara nearly walked the ball into the net. He took about 15 steps, but he walked the ball into the net. There was going to be no kind of in between. They were going to absolutely gut them if they got half a chance. And in fairness to them, they did. It was one of the most impressive All Ireland performances. With Lara touching the ball. What did he touch the ball? 7 times or something like that, and ended up with 3-1. It was an unbelievably clinical display, in fairness.
One question I'd ask you, are there more legends on that Kilkenny 2010 team or the 2014 team?
Well, Tommy Walsh is a legend of the game and is not on the 14 team.
And I mean legends at their height too, obviously.
Yeah, there's a fair... I don't have them in front of me here. I'll get them up here now, actually. Off in 13, looking like they were going to have to go through a small transition, albeit, and introduce some new faces, and yet still beat the old enemy in the All-Ireland final.
Okay, we're going to have to call it so. I mean, for me, it's Tipperary all day. You've got Lark Orbit at his height. I think Brendan Maher was probably hurler of the year up to the point of him getting the hat-trick. Paddy Maher, unbelievable. It's just front to back. I think that Tipperary team beats that. Either that Kilkenny or Tip team in 2014 loses by 7 or 8 points to that Tipperary 2010 team. I don't think it's a discussion. I know you've fought hard and you've fought well and you've come up with a few phony sort of points there, but I think even you can accept that it's Tip 2010 all day.
The any team that stops a 5 in a row, no more than if somebody had stopped, Dublin's 5 in a row last year, that's something that will go down in history as, that Tipperary team will forever be etched in history. Will the Kilkenny 2014 team be? No, it won't. It won't be talked about in the same kind of conversations as that 2010 team will be for Tipperary, to be fair to them. And the thing about, and Tipperary didn't just beat Kilkenny in the All-Ireland final. They beat them, pretty comfortably. If that game had went on for another 10 minutes, they would have beaten them by more. They were running down through the middle, and the thing of Noel McGrath coming out there, touching the head, looking at Owen Kelly and that, and it was just like they'd learned their lessons from 09 and were going to hammer them home in 10, and they fairly did, in fairness to them.
And as well, the amount of scores that Kilkenny conceded in that 2014, the drawn game especially, you had Seamus Callanan scoring, was it 6 from play on JJ Delaney. Everyone likes talking about the hook, and the second one scored 2 goals from play on him that day. I think some of those brilliant players were at their real peak at 2010 on either side of it, like JJ Delaney got man of the match in that 11 final when he was marking Seamus Callanan, who was taken off at half time. So it's not like I'm just trying to pick him out and slate him for that, but very much a player that was at his very peak 4 years earlier and 3 years earlier, not quite at the same level as well. So I think that's kind of across the board with a lot of that Kilkenny team and a lot of those legends. So that's why I just about have to go that way. Have you anything more to say on it before I wrap it up?
No, just on that point you make there, if you look at Jackie Tyrrell in 14, Jackie Tyrrell wasn't on the team in 16. JJ was retired by 16. Do you know what I mean? Tommy was retired by 16. Henry was retired by, you know what I mean? A lot of lads were nearing the end in 14.
Actually, by 15, a lot of them were gone in terms of starters.
So like, for a lot of them, 2014, 2015 was, you know, a great way to finish. Whereas back 8, 9, 10, they were in their absolute pomp. They were so hard to beat. Like, if anything, 14 and 15 were a bit against the grain somewhat. Whereas back in the day, you just could not see Kilkenny being beaten by anybody. And in fairness, Tipperary did beat them in 10, and that will go down in history as one of the great wins for any team.
Okay, well that's it. It's now out to the public vote, so go to ourgame.ie and underneath the video you can click for that vote. We'll do a battle on this again. There's plenty more Kilkenny and Tipperary teams coming up in this knockout competition. Cheers, Michael.
Sound, Shane.